So guys, thank you all for being here. We have a lot to talk about because this was a very busy show. And let's start at the end though, because there's some things that happen there at the end of First Adventures that a lot of fans, I'm sure, have a lot to say about, a lot to ask about. So let's talk about the deaths. And when you're approaching something like that, these are big deals. These characters are very important. How did you decide who wasn't going to make it to the end as you were planning out season 5?
We didn't want to kill anybody, but Denise, as usual, the darkness, insisted that we had to fulfill the mandate from the pilot onwards when no one makes it out alive, and we largely let her drive the bus on that one.
Yes.
No, I think we had laid out from the beginning that this was going to be a show with stakes, where we weren't interested in doing the 400th episode. We weren't interested in doing the sort of spin it out forever. We wanted to tell a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it's been a great, the way that it's worked out, it's been a great privilege to be able to do exactly that. But that always, that was always predicated on loss and change. And broadcast television, not always crazy about taking those sorts of risks, but we sort of built it into the show from the very beginning.
I think in a weird way, her dying was in some sort a completion of her arc. She died and she sacrificed herself to save Finch, and we got to see the next evolution, the next step with the machine adopting her personality and her voice. And for me personally, when we were in the writer's room and we were talking about the finale and who else might perish, it became also a question about character arcs and what we had left to tell. And I think, with Reese and Finch, there's such a strong story of redemption with these characters. And for me, having Reese perish was the completion of his arc, that he actually could finally repay his friend for giving him a new purpose in life.
Let's talk a little more about the machine, because as you said, you begin the show with this core concept, and there's this idea of this AI. But then the show goes on, and you have to sort of evolve that, and how are you going to depict that on screen? So what was that like for you, sort of always coming up with what would the machine be? I know I've asked you in the past, what would its voice be, which in the final episodes becomes very specific. But were there many conversations?
We told you that.
Yes.
And actually someone had asked, it's funny, we went to Comic-Con, I think it was prior to season 3. We got a question about, will the machine ever get a voice? And we had said it's going to get a voice and you're not going to like it. And the audience all kind of went, whoa, what are they talking about? And it's like, well, this is what that means. And one of the things I'm most proud of with the show is the way that we, a large group, very talented writers, all working together, all, and very slowly building this kind of amorphous, non-character character from the pilot onwards, very deliberately. You get to the end of the first season is the first time that Reese ever interacts with the machine directly. By the end of season 4, Finch is interacting with it in a way that's emotional for the audience. It's dying. Calibrating that journey from the machine being something that Michael and Jim's character talk about in Central Park, purely in the abstract, as a sort of a security apparatus, but knowing exactly where we wanted to go with it and managing to pull that off one step at a time to where we wind up in the finale. Sort of in Finch's imagination, Amy as Root, as the machine kind of appears and talks to him, and finally over the course of 103 episodes you've landed on, no, this is what the machine looks like, this is what it sounds like, this is how it thinks, and really growing a character from the beginning to the very end. Really, really cool and beautifully executed over the years.
Michael, what did you think of when you saw how they were going to wrap this all up?
I thought it was appropriate that Root sort of merges with the machine. It had been her reason to live. It had been a godlike thing to her. In a way, it's sort of sacramental that she's now inside the thing, or the thing is inside her. We don't have to know exactly how all that happens.
You had to do a lot of heavy lifting over the years, though, because you had to have increasingly emotional scenes with this computer, who I'm guessing isn't the best partner acting-wise. So what was that like for you to, have to chart everything that happened between them?
I didn't think of it as a difficulty. I mean, I do think that Tony Patine, script supervisor, is probably my greatest scene partner of all time, because he always reads the other side of all those scenes, whoever I'm talking to electronically or whatever, it's always his voice coming out of the darkness. So you get used to that after a while. And as far as the gradual humanizing of the machine, that seemed like a lovely thing to me, and I liked how that grew. It felt really natural and organic. It didn't seem like a stretch or anything or an abstraction, really. It just seemed like, well, if you spent, a good chunk of your life making a tool that has language and decision-making powers, then how would you not begin to have something like affection or a parental feeling for it? So for my money, that was some of the real goods of the show, at least for me as the actor playing Mr. Finch. I always loved that stuff.
Do you recall how did they sort of tell you guys how the ending was going to go and what the fates of all the characters were? Did you just find out via script, or did you have a big conversation about it?
Is it all right if I say I don't remember ever having a conversation about that exactly?
We did talk a little bit. Your character's turn through this season, Michael, was something we were very excited about. And that sense of Finch throughout the seasons, throughout the entire run of the show, has been kind of the moral compass of the show. And Finch has very much set the rules for how they're going to engage and how they're going to fight back. And when you're working with such a fantastic actor, you say, well, it's wonderful to have spent 90 episodes with such intellectual and moral rigor, but wouldn't it be fun to see him blow to pieces? I want to see that veneer crack a little bit and get a sense and get a chance to really play with the character a little bit. So we talked about that before we started shooting anything this season, knowing that we wanted to take Finch in that, I would say not a dark direction, but just a direction in which he has to wrestle with these rules that he's been fighting with for so long as things really as the wheels start to come off.
Mm-hmm. The world building became very, very impressive, and that you have so many different organizations and all these different elements. And I say this with complete affection, I promise, but it's funny because sometimes I would have to be like, okay, wait, Decima is doing this, and like, right. For you, Michael, working on the show, was it kind of funny for you? Did you have times where you were trying to kind of chart all the different organizations they were throwing at you and all these different groups? Has it started to build one upon the other?
There was a period there on the show where it was a pretty full house. There were a lot of operators, a lot of organizations. I mean, mostly they were our enemies. So, I mean, we could have kind of a unity of attitude about all of them, but it was, some days you'd have to stop and think, no, these are those other bad guys.
Right. Bringing in characters like Elias, you never know, that's a character obviously you were seeding, but then there's other people that you might just bring in thinking they're going to be, 1 week and then they take off. I mean, Michael, even on Lost, you had a similar situation where you're supposed to be on a few episodes. It turns into something. So was there, for you guys, was there a character that you kind of were surprised by where it took you as you just were like, everything's working right, we need to do more with this?
I feel like Ruth's character was that character for us, Amy Acker. I mean, she came in and she stole the show. And as Jonah said earlier, they were so great together, Finch and Root and Root and everyone, really. And you would put her with any different character and they had such amazing dynamic. And so we just wanted to keep writing her more and more. And she kind of evolved that way for us, I think.
It did strike me, because Root and Elias die in the same episode. And I was like, they were both introduced pretty much as villains, or certainly antagonists. And yet they both have these sort of emotional, they're very meaningful to your character, both of them, amongst other people. For you guys, was it fun for you to see how a character like that, you could really sort of morph and change who they were when we started to who they were at the end?
I think writing the villains was the most fun on the show. And, eventually you humanize all of them, or they become sympathetic to a certain degree. We war over that in the writer's room. But of course, Enrico's character was so fabulous at playing it. And when you understood his backstory, same thing with Leslie Odom Jr. when he came on the show, when you finally understood that character's backstory and how he became, the sort of anti-surveillance vigilante or terrorist, whatever you want to call him, you totally understood. And those were the most fun characters for me to write, and the least favorite calls I had to make with Jonah and Denise.
Starting out, Shaw got kind of a big spotlight episode, a great introduction. But it was interesting when you see, like you were talking about, you've got Root and Finch go on sort of a road trip, and you see what that's like. And then you've got Shaw and Root who has, in a scene that you now did of many callbacks to, but there's some torture involved. There's like, it does not seem like things are going to go well for these two. What was it like for you guys to see, where that dynamic took you, the two characters there?
That was always exciting and fun to write, because I think for me personally, I didn't really know. We were discovering it along the way as well. And those ladies had such great chemistry together, starting off with the torture that you mentioned, the iron. And it was kind of undeniable. And it was interesting to me too that you had someone who was so, she has a personality disorder, so she can't really feel the way other people feel. And then you have this other person who is a killer and feels everything and allows herself to feel everything, So it's like those two were such an interesting dynamic, and I feel like the finale was kind of the completion of their story in a way. Shaw didn't really get to say goodbye to Root, and she finally gets to say goodbye to the machine and therefore say goodbye to Root in a way. And then at the end, she's got the new version of the machine in her ear. Right. So it's kind of, it was an interesting path to go down, and I think for me, I didn't know we were going to go down this way, but it evolved that way.
We knew it because I directed that episode. And, Amanda Siegel co-wrote it. Yeah. And I had joked with Amanda before we went in to shoot that scene. I was like, I'm English, man. We want to get some sexual chemistry out of this scene because it's clearly there. It's in the subtext of it. But I'm not going to be able to direct that. So I said, Amanda,
wait, when you say you're English, does that mean you're repressed or you're a pervert? Which one?
Probably both. I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Repressed pervert, I guess, most of the English population. But it was that kind of thing of, terribly embarrassed. How are we going to tell these ladies that we want to sort of, that there's a subtext here? When you work with very smart actors, they don't often miss things, but occasionally you have to kind of nudge a little bit like, well, we really wanted this to have a bit of a thing there. And I had schemed out with Amanda how we were going to try to get that flavor out of this scene. And this is when we knew we were going to be working with Amy Acker for a long time to come, because Amy wandered over, and I hadn't worked directly with her as a director. So I was sort of talking through the scene, and Amy said, "I think there's a bit of a sexual thing here, isn't there?" Right? And Amy's not that person, but it was like, okay. And she says, "How about I would it be okay if I sort of pulled her in close and leaned in really close to her?" And we're just kind of going, "Yeah, that would be great, Amy. That would be exactly what we're looking for in the scene." When you find that chemistry and you find that connection between two characters and two actors, you've got to follow it.
The show, always had that foot into sci-fi with, the machine, which again, it's like, everyone's like, hey, something like this is coming. And then of course there was some stuff that seemed like it's already here. But for you guys, how much did you also have to sort of make that debate about, what's the line as far as when we're getting, oh, this is not person of interest, if a robot started walking around as like, I am the machine, Did you have conversations about, how far you could go with that?
We definitely had a lot of conversations about that, and drones and all that fun stuff that's out there now. I was cleaning out my office the other day, and I came across the beat sheet that Jonah handed me 5+ years ago, and it was a novel for most people. It was massive, the pilot. But what was remarkable about that document is how much of that material we continue to use further on, even past season 1. I think some of that material just kept pushing out. And that's kind of when I think I knew that we had something special here in terms of, obviously the genius of what Jonah came up with was there was an engine. But there was something else about this show, and it had something to say. And I think, obviously, just watching, I think when we were shooting the pilot as well, there was one of the first Google cars drove by with the camera on top of it, which we later actually had in one of the episodes. And it was just this bizarre moment where you're like, what is that thing? And then it just became commonplace, and it continually happened where life imitates POI over and over again, whether we were talking about the surveillance state or we started talking about artificial intelligence on a greater level. I think for me, that's one of the most rewarding things about the show. Here today, we're talking about Apple needing to build a back door for the government, you know, in our cell phones. And you're sitting here going, hey, guys, this show, I hope it becomes an adjective someday, like Orwellian, person of interest. Like, find an adjective to describe what this show has done. Because I get it over and over, and we all did from our relatives and friends, and they send you stuff, and they're like, this is happening. And you're like, yeah, we've kind of been talking about it.
When the Snowden moment, the Snowden revelations were this sort of watershed moment. I think that happened season 2 into season 3, where people realized, oh, we sort of dismissed this thing as, and I remember reading the article, you know, the reviews of the pilot. I don't remember what you guys said. I'm sure it was very positive. But some of the reviews of the pilot were a little far-fetched and kind of goofy. It was sort of in the realm of, like, you know, shows where you get tomorrow's newspaper today, or you get, or you have a magic, you know, a set of magic dice or a magic 8-ball that tells you who's going to be murdered somewhere in Manhattan. And it was sort of in the genre of those shows, where we were sort of quietly saying, no, this is very real, and we're trying to figure out what happens next. Google has had for many, many years known far more about us than even it knows what to do with. It's like, you know, it can see, you know, because its core business is telepathy, basically. You know, what do you want to buy is basically what a business is. But you get all sorts of other information that comes out of that, and it'd be, I mean, elementary for Google to look at people's searches and know if they're suicidal, homicidal. I mean, that's more information certainly than they know what to do with. I mean, no one's quite figured out. They haven't figured out what to do with that information, and no one's quite figured out how responsible to hold them for that sort of thing. But it's just one example of, you know, the sort of the big data aspect of the show poses so many interesting questions. But I think for me, the show was always science fiction, in as much as, I mean, you know, a lot of what we were talking about was real, and it was frustrating not to have people understand that. It's like, no, read the New York Times from 2005. You don't need to wait for Snowden. 2005, they were telling you that the NSA could turn on your phone, that it could turn on, you know, remotely activate the microphone, even if it was turned off, as long as it had battery, as long as, you know, these revelations have been out there. We sort of put our heads in the sand a little bit with them. But for me, the show was always a genre show. You wake up one day and realize that everything you work on is genre, because it's what you're interested in. And so it was always a bit of a science fiction aspect to it. I was never afraid of that. We had to sort of hide that in plain sight a little bit, but it was no surprise to us that the show grew in that direction, because it was sort of baked into the recipe from the beginning.